Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Jesse. Before we get into this episode, Delete Me makes it easy, quick, and safe to remove your personal data online at a time when surveillance and data breaches are common enough to make everyone vulnerable. Your data is a commodity. Anyone on the web can buy your private details. This can lead to identity theft, phishing attempts, and harassment. But now you can protect your privacy with Delete Me. The New York Times Wirecutter has named Delete Me their top pick for data removal services. As someone who has an active online presence, privacy is really important to me to protect myself to the best of my ability from harassment, doxing. If you have never been a victim of identity theft, harassment, or doxing, you probably know somebody who has, and Delete Me can help. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me, now at a special discount for our listeners. Get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go join deleteme.com/hit and use promo code HIT at checkout. The only way to get 20% off is to join deleteme.com/hit and enter code HIT at checkout. That's join deleteme.com/hit, code HIT. All right, getting into the episode. The Orioles are trying to take care of the first order of business for this offseason. And it is a big order of business. It is finding and figuring out who is going to be the Orioles 2026 manager. That is the priority right now for the Orioles. I think that is the move that comes prior to any of the further offseason moves that end up happening. So the Orioles are trying to figure this out and trying to get this squared away. The Orioles have been interviewing various different candidates for the position, and one name among the entire group has stood out among the rest of them, and that is none other than Albert Pujols. I am not going to take this episode to talk about the managerial search more broadly, although maybe I will hint at certain things. But I am just going to take a little bit of time to talk about the reports that have come out that show that the Orioles have interviewed Albert Pujols for the managerial role in 2026. Now, Albert Pujols has apparently been interviewing with various different clubs that are looking for managers. Now, the one spot that I think probably garnered a lot of attention for him was that he was interviewing with the Angels. And at this point in time, it seems as if that is not going to be the situation. Um, a, a report from uh, the New York Post came out from John Heyman saying that Albert Pujols won't be the next manager of the Angels, which is a really big deal. And I think it changes sort of the Orioles' positioning potentially within how this works. The Orioles interviewed him. There is not much clarity around to what extent the Orioles are interested in Albert Pujols as their next manager. I will do some speculation about that as we continue here in this episode. But he did interview for the position, and the Orioles are considering uh, a Hall of Fame type player to be the Orioles' next manager. Now the Orioles are interviewing other candidates, of course. There are other people in consideration. Ryan Flaherty has gone around as a possibility. Luis Rojas is also was also interviewed in the Orioles managerial search. Um, but yeah, obviously Ryan Flaherty and Rojas are not really the same sort of name as Albert Pujols is. And So sort of, I want to just spend a little time talking about what this means, what the possibility is that Albert Pujols is actually the next manager for the Orioles. And then I'm going to use what we know about Mike Elias, to try to inform, our speculation about how the Orioles and Mike Elias are thinking about and perceiving Albert Pujols. Um, one of the things that has sort of stood out amongst this is that this came out. Eli and Tyler, we were messaging about this a little bit. And one of the things Tyler pointed out is that it is interesting that that this was news, right? The Orioles are very, very under the radar most of the time with a lot of the decisions that end up getting made. So it's interesting that this news came out. And I think that it is worth pointing out that it is likely from somewhere within Albert Pujols's world that ended up leaking the information, probably due to um, the possibility of drumming up interest in him being a manager somewhere. Now the Angels are sort of seem like they're not going to go in the direction of Albert Pujols as their manager. But there are other vacancies at this point, and he was in consideration for the Angels when it came out that he had interviewed with the Orioles. So um, there is a good possibility that this came out from somewhere in Pujols's camp, because the Orioles generally do not like sharing this kind of information more widely and more broadly. Yeah, I think that there are a few things that we could kind of think about, and sort of directions that this can kind of go in. I think from the perspective of Pujols, I think he is trying to, um, obviously, he wants to be a major league manager. And at this point, as there always are, very few openings in Major League Baseball. The Twins are a possibility, the Padres are a possibility, and just the Angels, and a couple others, and the Orioles, of course. So they're not a lot that are open, and Pujols has never been a major league manager before, so this would be a new role for him. And I think that there is some possibility that he will probably take an MLB job if it's offered to him. I think that's not necessarily fully true if it was a really, really bad situation that he was walking into, potentially. Because he is a Hall of Famer, I think that, probably in his mind, I think that somebody he feels like probably will eventually at some point give him an opportunity to be an MLB manager, but breaking in, I think, would be a big deal for him. And especially if he has some sort of success, he could definitely leverage that into a position that is really, really desirable for him. It would make a lot of sense that he would want to return to be the Angels manager after having spent so much of his career there. But with that said, I'm always a little skeptical about how those sort of things work out. If you think about somebody like Jeter managing the Yankees, or somebody like, I mean, this would not happen, but Palmer managing the Orioles. It is a little difficult when you are ownership trying to bring in um, sort of a legendary type figure into the same community that you ended up playing for, because there's always the possibility that things go wrong. If he were to become the Angels manager, for instance, and a few years have gone by and there has not been very much success, and ownership or the GM wants to go in a new direction, it's going to be really hard at that point to tell the fan base and tell Pujols, hey, you're fired and we need you to submit your resignation, right? So I think in general, it's sort of best practice for teams to avoid bringing in these type of figures to their own clubhouse. It's a little different situation with if Pujols were to come into the Orioles because the fan base doesn't have that same sort of attachment and commitment to Pujols. But with that said, um, it does sort of bring or it does sort of introduce in some sense a lot of drama and a lot of headlines and a lot of attention on Baltimore. And there is some question in my mind about how much that is really wanted by Mike Elias, by the Orioles organization more broadly. And I think the other thing that, really I wonder about in terms of from the Orioles' perspective, how much are the Orioles really entertaining this idea of having Pujols be their manager? The thing that I come back to is we think about Brandon Hyde, and Brandon Hyde was a bench coach on within the Cubs organization. He was working under Joe Madden for a while, who was a very, very innovative manager and was like, really pushing the game in a new direction. Now, maybe at the time he was managing the Cubs he wasn't sort of the same sort of innovative type manager that he was when he was with the Rays. But nonetheless, he was definitely a really smart baseball guy. Really had a reputation for doing things differently and getting the most out of the Tampa Bay Rays, who were a very low budget team, of course. So the fact that Brandon Hyde spent time under Madden, learning from him, and that was the guy that Michael Elias ended up going with. I think says a lot about sort of what he was kind of looking for. Albert Pujols had an incredible playing career, but he has never been a major league manager at this point so far. And I'm curious about especially with Mike Elias being as committed as he is to the analytics and to the numbers and to his particular formula. I'm very curious what his thoughts are on bringing someone who, despite his tremendous playing career, hasn't really had that. While under sort of the guidance of somebody who was making managerial decisions. Now, Pujols was a player. Obviously, he was very much in tune with the analytics and the numbers and the research on, during his playing career. But that's very different and a very different perspective. Looking over the scouting reports in general is very different than trying to make bullpen decisions at the end of a game or, trying to make decisions about pinch hitting or pinch running here or there, these sorts of things. So, I'm very curious, kind of like what the level of interest on behalf of the Orioles would be in bringing in somebody who would be starting their managerial career completely fresh into an Orioles organization and what that would be like. And if that is something that Michael Elias would value, I think that Michael Elias has a lot riding on this decision of who is going to be the next Orioles manager. Tyler has talked about how he thinks, even though we're not really sure he is, but how he thinks next year really needs to be, a show me type of year for Mike Elias. The Orioles have to show a significant improvement from where they were this past year in 2025 in order for Michael Elias to like retain his job. So is Michael Elias going to sort of risk introducing somebody who has no managerial experience or even being the bench coach, right, of an organization and have them take the realm. Now, I think from like, without knowing much about Pujols' personality or, how he is relationally, how he is going to sort of operate or function in the dugout. I think that somebody like Pujols is immediately coming into the clubhouse having sort of inherited almost the respect of all the players on the team, right? You're not going to have a legendary quote unquote legendary figure like Albert Pujols walk into a major league dugout and somebody like Henderson or whoever the really talented players who may be arrogant on the Orioles are, um, you're not going to have them disrespect somebody like Albert Pujols, who has earned through his Hall of Fame enough or sort of infinite amounts of baseball credibility, right? So that is one thing that I think that Pujols will have on some of the other candidates. If Rojas were to be the manager, now I know this is not, I'm very much oversimplifying things. But if, somebody is trying to provide guidance on hitting to Gunnar Henderson, I think he would much be more receptive to hearing hitting advice from someone like Albert Pujols than Luis Rojas. So, no disrespect at all to Rojas, and he was a solid player, absolutely in his own right. And he shouldn't be disrespected because he wasn't as good as Albert Pujols, but it is just kind of how things go a little bit. And, so Albert Pujols will sort of inherit immediate respect from a lot of the players in a way that a few other people around Major League Baseball might, because of his playing experience, because of his playing career, his trip to the Hall of Fame, his 700 home runs, etc. I think if Pujols were to be introduced as the manager or any manager that is, getting a managerial job with the Orioles for the first time, I think that it would mark a bit of change sort of in the direction. I think that there would be a lot of positives to bringing somebody like Albert Pujols, let alone it'd be exciting just to have somebody as good at the game as he was around all the time, giving press conferences and just so heavily involved with this Orioles community. That by itself would be incredible. If the Orioles do end up returning to the playoffs at some point, he will have tremendous playoff experience and guidance to provide to this Orioles team. Hopefully, he would be able to help some of the younger guys get through that. Now, a lot of times, of course, you want that to sort of be internal in the sense that well, not internal exactly, but you want players on the team actually, or veterans who have actually sort of had this, been there, done that type thing before. But Pujols would definitely be an asset with that. We think about, some of Brandon Hyde's errors that we've pointed out on this podcast in the past before, and potentially some of those were informed by his inexperience as a manager in the playoffs. And who knows, like it's possible his sort of nervous energy, if he was nervous during the playoffs, disseminated to the rest of the team. Now, I'm not saying that, I'm not making any significant claims about that, but that's something I wouldn't really worry about with somebody like Pujols being the manager. I think Pujols here is definitely like the flashiest option. Of course, if you're bringing in a Hall of Famer to be the manager, that comes with a lot attached to it. I think that a lot of it can be really positive for the Orioles. I do think there are potentially some drawbacks, but from my feeling of it, from my read of it, I sort of do feel like the Orioles and Michael Elias, this would sort of not be the move that I would expect Michael Elias to make for the Orioles going forward. Now, we will see, and maybe Pujols has a lot, and maybe they had some really, really great conversations and they got along great, and there are all these different things that you could kind of point to that you know that Michael Elias sort of is like, no, actually, this is the guy, and I do feel comfortable and confident with him. Like, I don't know, but my sort of inclination is that Michael Elias will want to bring in somebody who will have a little bit of a different outlook on the team, a little bit more experience managing or being a coach on a team, a major league team. So we'll kind of see how things shake out, but at least from my perspective, it would be amazing to have Albert Pujols as a major league manager for the Orioles. It feels so opposite to what will happen and what I've come to expect and know about these Orioles. But with that said, if the Orioles made the move to get Albert Pujols as their manager, I would be elated. I would be really, really excited about, where things are going potentially. He would definitely be a significant change in direction. I think that just thinking about sort of the freshness of what it would be like to have him as a manager, I think that does represent maybe some shift. I don't know exactly beyond Mancelino who the sort of continuity candidates are for Michael Elias and this Orioles regime, and obviously it's not as simple as a change or a shift or continuity and stagnation. It's going to be on a scale or a spectrum. But I think Pujols is, definitely much more on the change sort of side of things. And it would be very interesting to see what his influence and what his role, and, what sort of changes in the direction the Orioles end up going in with him being introduced. So it's really, really exciting. We will definitely keep talking about the managerial search as things sort of continue. I think that yeah, as far as Pujols being the Orioles manager in 2026. I am not expecting it, as I said, but it'd be really exciting. It would give us some immediate things to be really, really hyped up about. And yeah, just being able to, and for all the players too, being able to be in his presence on a day in and day out basis, I think would really be beneficial in a lot of ways to a lot of the Orioles' growth and development. And yeah, I think it'd be really exciting to have him be the manager. I'm just not sure. I'm not saying definitively that it is the right move for the Orioles to make. I feel like would be a move that is counterintuitive for Elias in a lot of ways, but um, yeah, definitely something that we will keep an eye on. We will talk about more broadly, just this managerial search. But definitely wanted to come on, especially with the Angels sort of seeming like they are out of the running for Pujols. Maybe the Orioles' chances of getting him went up just a couple ticks, even if it is still a percentage that I would say is probably under 20, being lenient, but probably under 10%. So we'll see what happens, but this would be really, really exciting, at least in the short term. And then we will, if he is the Orioles manager, we will go right back to being very harsh and critical and unfair to him and to a lot of the decisions he's making with this Orioles team, especially if it continues to struggle next year in 2026. So anyway, thank you all so much for listening. This was just, yeah, just a quick episode about the managerial search a little bit, but more about Albert Pujols and the possibility of him coming to be the next Orioles manager. Um, Before I get out of here, I hope that you have been enjoying playoff baseball. And uh, little bit of a shout out to Shohei Ohtani's just remarkable game four against the Brewers, of course, with the three home runs and the six shutout innings pitched. Absolutely incredible. He is, yeah, absolutely incredible, and can't, he is constantly impressing, I think, baseball fans everywhere. So incredible to watch. Game seven between the Blue Jays and Mariners is happening now. And even though I am bracing for another Dodgers World Series victory, it'll be interesting to watch, and we'll see what happens. And maybe one of these two teams can override them, despite my skepticism. And we will see. So. Anyway, thank you all so much. Please follow the show, give us a 5-star rating and review. Subscribe to us on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel. Feel free to comment with any thoughts. If you want to get in touch with the show, feel free to email us, thewarehousepod@gmail.com. Please follow us on Instagram and Blue Sky at The Warehouse Pod. Thank you all so much for listening. This has been The Warehouse Podcast. My name is Jesse, and go O's.